Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Council Residential Districting Commission's Vulnerable Communities Meeting. My name is Avery Frost. With me today are my fellow commissioners, Jeff Cabot, Monica Sarazuela, Dave Paul, and Commission Chair Malik Moore. The Council Residential Districting Commission is a collective of residents formed to draw maps, creating 9 residential districts in Columbus. We're excited to be here tonight to hear from you. We look forward to hearing the ways in which you describe your neighborhood, become more familiar about which area, commission, or civic association you belong to, and more. And we hope that you can really fill us in on the area from where you come. These questions and more are what we hope to hear today, but as well, we hope to receive general feedback on the districting process as a whole. We are doing this work ahead of drawing the first draft of the city district map to ensure that we know what matters most to you about your city, your community, and hoping to better understand why. Just a reminder, this meeting is currently live on Facebook, YouTube, and CTV, Columbus's government television channel 3. We will have time today for all voices to be heard. We will solicit the feedback of those attendees joining us through WebEx, and we will hear from you later in the meeting. If you're viewing through Facebook or YouTube, please write your questions and thoughts in the comment section. We'll address those as well. Whichever way you are joining us today, your comments and your voice are part of our overall feedback. Your voice is heard. So just to recap, during our first 2 meetings this year, we heard from local speakers about a few different topics relevant to our districting work. If you'd like to go back and watch any of these presentations, you can find the recordings and slides from the presentations on the www.columbus.gov/districting commission webpage. My fellow commissioners will now briefly highlight some key points from those presentations. Dave?
Thank you, Avery. At our first meeting, we received a presentation on the Voting Rights Act from Kyle Strickland of the Kirwan Institute. Kyle reminded us that the Voting Rights Act requires our city's districts to be drawn fairly, considering the racial makeup and the diversity of the proposed district. Gerrymandering, also known as packing, is something we need to make sure we avoid in our work. We want our districts to be proportionate to the electorate.
Thank you, Commissioner Paul. Commissioner Cabot?
Thank you, Avery. We also had a presentation by David Huey of the Columbus Neighborhoods Department. There are currently 21 area commissions recognized by the City of Columbus and supported by the Department of Neighborhoods. There are also hundreds of civic associations, block watch groups, and other organizations throughout the city. These organizations serve as catalysts to change not only in their neighborhood, but at City Hall and beyond.
Thank you, Commissioner Cabot. Commissioner Sarazuela?
Thank you, Commissioner Frost. We also heard a presentation on Columbus growth patterns presented by Kevin Wheeler and Mark Dravilis. We know that redlining and the construction of the interstate system drastically altered some of our neighborhoods, specifically our neighborhoods of color, the effects of which we can still see today. And we know that Columbus has grown substantially and continues to be one of the fastest growing cities in the Midwest.
Thank you, Commissioner Sarazuela. Commissioner Chair Moore?
We also got to hear about Columbus neighborhoods and what we learned there. That history has shaped the way that we see the communities as they are today. And so we recognize that it is important to consider the differences as well as similarities between these neighborhoods.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair Moore. And again, you can view these presentations in full on our CRDC webpage. Before we move into the main discussion this evening, we have a short presentation from Naya Walters, in-house counsel and legal analyst of Columbus City Council, to teach us about the residential districting survey that we're promoting in conjunction with our weekly meeting. Naya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Commissioner Frost. Good evening. My name is Naya Walters, and I'm the project lead for the Council Residential Districting Commission. Tonight, I will be introducing our survey. This survey is designed to solicit feedback from you, our residents, on what you think is important for the CRDC to consider when they are drafting the maps that will produce non-residential districts for council. This is a historical moment for our city, and we cannot do it without hearing from the voices that matter most. This survey consists of general and specific questions around districting as well as demographic information. There are a couple ways to access this survey. You can visit the CRDC website at www.columbus.gov/districting commission, or you can go directly to the survey link at www.surveymonkey.com/r/Columbus districts. Your participation in this survey and this process will help ensure that the final map is a reflection of the community's voice. At this time, I will do a brief screen share of each website so you can see that. Ms. Angela, can you please give me sharing capabilities? Thank you. Here you can go to our website, again, columbus.gov/districting commission. And if you scroll down, you'll see the community meeting series, meeting videos, and then you will see the survey right here. So you can go there and click this link to take the survey, or you can go directly to the link that I provided, which is surveymonkey.com/r/Columbus districts, and it will take you directly to the survey. Getting your input in this survey is extremely important to helping the commissioners draw the maps and take into account what is important to their community. And that is all for me this evening. Thank you.
Naya, we hope that everyone here will fill out the survey. And again, one more time, you can access the survey at www.columbus.gov/districting commission. To kick off our discussion this evening, we invited a few community leaders from across the city that represent and serve some of our most vulnerable populations to speak and share with us their thoughts about districting, what is most important to their organization and the people they serve, and anything else relevant to the work of the CRDC. We ask that you try to keep your comments around 3 minutes. That'd be very helpful to us. First up to speak is Stephanie Hightower, president of the Columbus Urban League.
Thank you, Commissioner Avery, and thank you to the commissioners for, that feels funny saying Commissioner Avery. And thank you to the commissioners for allowing me to speak tonight. So Stanley didn't tell me that I only had 3 minutes, and so that's the first problem that we have. So if I go longer, I guess y'all will just have to mute me. I think it's important as in my role as the CEO, president and CEO of the Columbus Urban League, to share some insights on the work that we do here and how that will have some impact on this redistricting and why it's important to really emphasize some of the points that the few of the commissioners that you made in your opening statements. The issue of fairness, the proportionate, making sure that the redistricting is proportionate to populations, and that the growth patterns of the past and what redlining has done to this community, and now with what is happening in these new growth areas, how that can also have an impact on the decisions that you're going to be making as it relates to redistricting. The Columbus Urban League sits in the Near East Side, 788 Mount Vernon Avenue in the Kingless-Lincoln District. And I live on Woodland Avenue, which is a part of the Near East Side as well. So my comments today are based upon not only being an employer in this neighborhood, but also as a resident of this neighborhood. I want to share some facts with you that I think are really important about the reality of the racial inequalities that still exist in this community. First, Black people in Columbus, their median incomes are 40% less than the white population. Black people in Columbus comprise of 40% of those that are in poverty. Black people in Columbus are more than twice as likely to be unemployed, and because they are concentrated in frontline worker positions, they were hit hardest by COVID-19, and that will have lingering effects and impact probably for the next 10 years. Black people in Columbus live in one of America's most economically segregated cities, And this comes from studies that have been done by the Brookings Institute and McKinsey. Also, Black people in Columbus continue to endure consistently failing schools. I want to give you another fact here that I think is important in your deliberations. The facts are that if you're born poor and Black in Columbus, your chance of success later in life is going to be very abysmal. For example, data from Harvard's Opportunity Atlas tells us that Black children in low-income families in the Easton area likely will make less than $10,000 a year as an adult, while white kids who grow up in low-income families in the same area are expected to earn $45,000. And so I hope that as you are looking at these deliberations, what's important for organizations like myself and also being an African American is that you're going to develop solutions in the redistricting through a race-based lens. If that doesn't happen, then I think you are going to be setting our city and our neighbors up for failure. In particular, when you look on what's happening on the Near East Side right now, I'm not calling it regentrification, but 25 years ago, when I moved into this neighborhood, it was predominantly Black. I now jokingly say to a lot of my white friends, when I wake up on Saturday mornings now to walk my dog, I think I'm in Clintonville. And so I think we have to, I'm serious, Avery. I think we, as you are looking at redistricting, the fairness of how you're redistricting, because there is a large number of people that have come into this neighborhood. There are still Black people in this neighborhood. There are still poor people in this neighborhood. And there are still people who need to make sure that their voices are heard and that there is fair representation as this redistricting is put together. And this holds true for other neighborhoods as well, especially neighborhoods of color that are adjacent, those neighborhoods that may be on a different economic trajectory. I think we've got to make sure that the representation fits. And so that we're not redistricting, for continual segregation, which is what redlining did. I think it's really important that that is thought through. But again, there has to be a redistricting plan that has solutions that we are looking through a race-based lens to ensure that our neighbors and our neighborhoods have the kind of representation that is needed on their behalf so that they can continue, our neighborhoods can thrive and grow just like those neighborhoods in our suburban neighborhoods. Is that my 3 minutes?
Yeah, give or take, I would say. Thank you, President Hightower. Are there any questions from our commissioners right away? We have one from Commissioner Pohl.
Ms. Hightower, thank you very much for your comments. I wanted to explore just a little bit your comment about a race-based lens. I understand what you're talking about in terms of redlining and various kinds of economic segregation and segregation and other aspects of life that have occurred over the years. But you understand that our charge is simply to prepare maps based on population density, the boundaries of neighborhoods, and to be sensitive to what you're talking about, but not necessarily to base our recommendations in terms of maps on the racial makeup of a district. In fact, I'm not sure that we'll even be able to look deeply into the racial statistics, demographics of the districts we're creating. We're focused almost entirely on population. But we're trying to be cognizant of historical inequities, historical alliances between neighborhoods and so forth. And certainly that could help, I think, not replicate some of the inequities that occurred in the past. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying, Dave, and Naya came on and did a presentation for a group that I founded last year called the Equity Now Coalition, and did a report. And so as a social justice organization and civil rights organization, this is where I fear, based upon what you said, that we're not looking at it from the perspective that I talked about, that we know, yes, you may not know what the populations are or what the map says, but you know what the maps say. And what I'm saying is, I think that the decision, how you come up with those maps, that it just can't be on statistical, looking at the lines and where they're drawn and how they're drawn. Because, be perfectly honest, and Mr. Cabot or Commissioner Cabot will, we had some of these similar kinds of issues when we were looking at closing schools. Which ones were in the predominantly, white neighborhoods, and if we were going to be busing the Black kids over in the white neighborhoods. And those kind of political issues and race-related inequality issues existed. Now, back 20-something years ago, people were not talking about it the way we're talking about it now. But now that we are talking about it, Commissioner Paul, there still has to be that lens that you're looking through as you are, because if you want to start and segregate again, if that's what the intention is, based upon the lines and the people, then I think if you're not thinking through that, then I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. That's me looking at it from the lens of being a social justice advocate, and there has to be, if you're really talking about fairness in how this is being done, you have to look at it through that race-based lens.
If I could just follow up with a very brief comment. I do understand what you're saying. I think everyone on this commission is committed to keeping all that you mentioned in mind and being intentional about addressing the issues that have occurred that have resulted in inequities, economic disparities over the years. I think I want to make sure that everyone understands we're not looking at quotas based on ethnicity, racial makeup, et cetera. We do have distinct population targets that we must meet within very close tolerances for each district. But we're not trying to fill these districts with a specific racial makeup, because I think that might actually replicate the kinds of issues that you're referring to and perhaps create some reverse discrimination that I think we agree would not be a good thing. So thank you. I think we understand each other. I appreciate your clarification.
Yeah, and I hear exactly what you're saying, Mr. Paul, if I could, Madam Chair, but I will say this. I know what you're not supposed to be doing, but I know there's some people out there that are not thinking the same way you're thinking. That's all that's my point here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Frost.
Yeah, so thank you both for that. I think that kind of dialogue that has been having, and I think that we're talking about the same thing, just using different words, but making sure that we come at it from a space of equity. I think we're all on the same page there. Any other commissioners? Any questions? All right, not at this time. So thank you, President Hightower. We appreciate you being here with us this evening. And next up, we have Parody Martin King from the National Panhellenic Council.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be on. It's a pleasure to be on. It's good to see you, Sister Frost, and everyone who is here tonight. But representing currently the Panhellenic Council, National Panhellenic Council, which is comprised of 9 of the historically Black Greek letter organizations that are here in our city, with thousands of members that are represented in the Central Ohio area. As the president-elect, I'm just coming on to emphasize the importance of the work that is being done. I am a Columbus native. I'm born and raised in Columbus. I grew up around the 5th and Cassidy area. And right now I'm on the southeast side of Columbus. And if I look out my back window, I can see Independence High School. I'm an Eastmore High School grad, and it's wonderful to see in my neighborhood young people all the way from Eastmore to Walnut Ridge, Independence. We've got great schools. And when we're drawing these lines and we're doing the work, these are the people who make decisions around tax abatements, property taxes, things that affect our schools and education. And as a Columbus City graduate, it is important to have diversified perspectives at the table. Because as a professional who lives, resides, and doesn't work very far from where I live, it's just important that that representation is cognizant of the different socioeconomic backgrounds, languages, cultures that we have here represented in the city of Columbus. Columbus has grown exponentially, but we've got some challenges related to housing. We have some challenges related to the eviction rates. Is it affordable? Do we have affordable housing? And the individuals going to a system that looks a lot closer to a ward system with representation, it's going to be important to consider those individuals who are making decisions related to the quality of life for Central Ohioans. So just speaking as a person who lives in the city, who's working with a lot of professionals in the city, to emphasize the importance of the work and the variety of languages that are here in Columbus, Ohio. Okay, so that's it. I don't want to go over my time.
Thank you, Mrs. Martin King. Any questions or comments from the commissioners? None at this time. We thank you for being with us. And if there are any questions that pop up, we may ask again. But thank you for being here. And next up, we have Mr. Ty Sean Alexander on behalf of the Columbus Urban League Young Professionals. Mr. Alexander.
Good evening, everyone. So just like President Hightower said and Ms. King, actually, we were actually along the same lines. I was more so thinking of the gentrification of aspect of it. And me growing up here in Columbus, and I'm looking at all the different neighborhoods that have been gentrified, and I'm thinking of, but what about the people who lived here before that were pushed out now? If you look at the area when it comes to White Children's Hospital, that area has been built up so much that a lot of people have been moved, but the rate of the crime moved down Livingston Avenue or moved elsewhere. So when we start to draw the lines on the map, how is this going to affect our communities? Will there be housing, affordable housing, the education? How will that change? How will it affect the education systems of our community? Grocery stores. Not many of our communities have grocery stores or doctor's offices and things like that. So for me and my input in this is, how does this affect, or how will this affect all of our communities by drawing the lines and maps?
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Any questions from the commissioners?
I have less of a question, and I want to share a statement with Mr. Alexander and the rest of our guests, if I could. And so as folks are sharing tonight, and I'm hearing all of these relevant insights, I want to thank you for lifting up your voice. And to echo what Commissioner Paul shared, I want to just reflect the 7 criteria we have to use as it's written in the charter of the work we're doing. The maps that we draw of the 3 plans that have 9 districts, those maps have to comply with state and federal law, including the Voting Rights Act. The districts that we propose can't vary in population. Our largest district has to be no more than 1% in population from our smallest district. The districts have to be geographically contiguous. They have to share one border with the other district at least. The boundary should encourage geographic compactness. And by that, it means that the district should not attempt to connect disparate population centers, but more dense population centers by using corridors of low density. And to the extent predictable, the district boundaries have to be drawn to maintain the geographic integrity of the neighborhoods or a community of interest. And so I think what I'm hearing a lot of people say is that piece of community interest, and we have made note of that. There's 2 other criteria. The commission should try to draw the district boundaries using the boundaries of existing election precincts and geographically identifiable boundaries, such as roads or waterways. And then our last criteria that we have to use is the districts we propose shall not be drawn for the overt purpose of favoring or disfavoring any single political group. And so I want us to continue to share the insights. And I want you to understand the limited scope of the work that we're going to be proposing, and these 7 criteria that we're working within. Please continue to share your voices, but I just wanted to lift that up for the good of the order. Thank you, Commissioner Frost.
Yes, and thank you, Commissioner Chair Moore. And our last scheduled speaker for this portion is with us. We have Reverend Joel King from the NAACP. Reverend King.
I can't get my voice or the video working. Can you hear me? I'm on the phone with the
Yes,
voice.
We can hear you and see you, actually.
Didn't hear all the speakers before me, so I just trying to see where we are, other than trying to follow my president's advice to be on here to be a part of the event and see what we can do to make our city better and the school system better and the council system better with this movement of trying to make the districts. I just hope we just do the right thing as a city, make sure it's fair, and make sure that we can elect people of all backgrounds to the new positions that are open in council and not just do the same old that we've been doing in the past. So that's what we stand as NAACP. We monitored it before, we watched it before, we tried to do it, and then council jumped before us and got ahead of it, did it. Nevertheless, let's get it done, but let's do it the right way so people can be fairly elected to the council and be represented in all areas of the city. That's what we'll be watching as the NAACP as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Reverend King. Do you have any questions or comments from the commission?
No.
All right, cool. Hearing none. I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers that we've had so far. And we'll be moving into the general questions portion of this evening from the community. So just a few notes and reminders before we get into that. First and foremost, as far as speaking time is concerned, in order to be respectful of our time here this evening, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. For hand raising, if you'd like to speak, those joining us on WebEx, we will use the hand raising feature to call on speakers. If you look on the right-hand side at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little hand button. You can click this to raise or lower your hand. We will monitor and call on attendees with raised hands in the order that we receive them. If you would rather send your thoughts and responses via email, you can send those to CRDC@columbus.gov. For those viewing on Facebook or YouTube, please send comments in the comment section or use the same email, CRDC@columbus.gov. As said earlier, we're here tonight to hear from you. We prepared a few questions to help guide our discussion. I'll read through each of them now. First, what is the most important defining characteristic of your neighborhood? Next, what neighborhoods do you consider to be part of your community? Then we have what is important for the commission to consider when creating these districts? What would you like to see come from this districting process? What are the biggest needs you see in your community currently? What are the critical issues you see potentially arising in the next 10 years in your community, in your neighborhood? And do you think the City of Columbus is aware and acting on the issues facing your neighborhood? So please use the raise hand feature to share your comments, questions, and feedback. Reminder to please keep your comments under 3 minutes. All right, it looks like so if a question comes up on your mind, just raise your hand, but also put it in the comment section. And we do have one. It says, will HMDA data and census results be taken into consideration when carrying out your plan? This will be telling as it is related to past historical low, moderate income markets and diverse tract markets, like diverse census tract markets. And how is it related to current day? So for HMDA, I'm not sure what that references specifically, but if we'll check. I do know that to the best of our ability, we will use census data. Right now, we are going to be using as it's available, right? So right now we'll be using estimates, but we do know that the 2020 census will be made available by the end of the summer. Home mortgage, what data? Disclosure Act. Okay, so the homework gets Disclosure Act data and census results be taken into consideration. So we'll make a note of that HMDA to take a look into that. And as far as census, like I said, to the best of our ability, we will use the census data to govern. But as a number of our comments so far have noted, there has been a lot of movement of population in the Columbus Central City area over the last number of years. So we're going to do our best to get at it to see where people are at right now before we really dive into the map districting to the best of our ability. All right, we are, if anyone has any questions. And I do have a question for one of our, for people who we have with us on WebEx. So when we're thinking about population movement, so when talking about maybe Center City or your neighborhood specifically, is there anything that you can kind of comment on as to where you live specifically and maybe the changing demographics of your neighborhood? And that's an open question. All right, so hearing none, as we're thinking about how we are going to be sharing these drafts, and as we're putting together the maps, we really want to make sure that we get the drafts in front of as many members of our community as possible. So Reverend King, do you have any thoughts about how we could best share that information with the communities that you serve? Or Mr. Alexander, if you have a thought on that, as far as how can we best share this information with your community that you're serving once we get these maps or the draft. So Mr. King, Reverend King.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I was sharing with
yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear you.
The Ministerial Alliance, the IMA, the Pastoral Conference, the websites that they have, get that out to them so we get it out to all our operators as well. We'd be happy to share that with us, with the group, along with the OCP website, Facebook, book, to get out any way we can. I can work with you with the ministerial groups once that's sent to me, wants to get out. Yes, ma'am.
That'd be fantastic and helpful. As far as the Ministerial Alliance that you mentioned, how many churches are represented? And if you could guess, how many persons are we talking?
You have about, Pastor Company, have about 65 preachers, about 65 congregations. The Ministers Alliance consists of pastors and ministers. That's the Baptist Ministers Alliance only, of course, but you have the denomination Ministers Alliance, so you still find another 50 to 45 members per organization, so you cover a lot of territory if you get it out to all of us.
Great. Thank you. Great. Thank you for that. And we'll definitely make sure that we're intentionally reaching out to the communities as we're sharing these maps. Mr. Alexander, any thoughts on that particular point?
Sorry, I was trying to fix my connection. So can you actually repeat the question?
No problem. We're just saying, as we prepare drafts of these maps, do you have any advice or direction on how to best reach the community that you serve?
I would say that reaching will probably I think surveys are good, sending out surveys, but actually getting involved with the community. I know town hall meetings sound so old school, and I know that you all have been doing a lot of them, but I'm actually trying to figure out a way to get, as I say, nourish the community to get the information. So find out a way to actually get the community to come out so they can actually all be involved in the process.
Thank you for that. Another question for you would be, apologize. So do you, and this is for anyone, do you think that having council districts will help Columbus City Council members serve the public better, and specifically your communities better?
I would say yes. One, anytime you have a group of people leading or taking charge or leading something, it seems to be one more organized. But when you have one purpose in mind, it's going to help it. And so when you have those leaders who have maybe not have the same goal, but having those community people come together as well to help come together to create that one purpose in mind, I think everyone can get on the same page and then help build with each other and help build relationships.
Thank you for that. And Reverend King, any thoughts on that particular point?
Again, I say we got to get it, please. Can you still hear me here? Trying to get... To get everybody involved, we got to invite everybody at the table like we're trying to do with these town hall meetings that we've had, what we're trying to do tonight. But again, it's a consistent effort to make sure we get everybody at the table to get their input.
Thank you, thank you. And we did have a comment on Facebook from the original question involving a question from Cassius Smiley Clark on to how we could share the drafts, and he said you can partner with employers to share with their business resource group, who can share with their membership, which can cover a lot of ground quickly. So yes, thank you for that. And so do we have any other questions in the queue? Not looking like it. Go ahead, Commissioner Paul.
Thank you, Commissioner Frost. I'd just like to ask our guests at the close of the last meeting, or a couple of ideas that we were talking about in terms of sharing the maps and getting feedback on them, because we want to make sure that we do get feedback and relatively quickly, because we don't have a lot of time to work with between our first draft of the maps and the time we need to actually submit the final 3 drafts to council. We're the Columbus Metropolitan Library System, possibly Columbus City Schools in some fashion, if they're able to work with us on this. Faith-based organizations, and we've had, of course, that suggestion here tonight. I appreciate that. I wonder, do you agree that those other 2 that I mentioned would be helpful? Do you believe that folks in your neighborhoods would go to the library, look at the maps, perhaps fill out a form, or go online to enter their comments? And that was for anyone who cares to answer.
I'm going to say yes. Again, for me, it's all about just getting involved and getting those people out there. So as long as you have the drive to do it and a good team of people standing behind you, I believe, yes, it will be a great idea.
thanks for your response.
It looks like we have another question in. So specifically, Reverend King and Mr. Alexander, speaking of either communities that you're familiar with, that would be most helpful. What are some natural or physical landmarks that you think can serve as potential district boundary points? And so first, if you can kind of orient us to which part of town you're talking about, and then maybe kind of giving us some guidance or some advice on natural or physical landmarks that you think could be potential district boundary points. I'm sorry. It looks like that question was for us. Well, we're talking about 9 districts that we haven't even started drafting yet, but I don't know if any commissioners or our chair had anything to say about that particular question.
I
Go ahead.
do have what I believe to be some boundaries in my head. And as I say it, I also understand that as I look at things through the lenses we heard earlier, I might need to reconsider those, right? So a natural border that I've thought of would be Broad Street, High Street, the Scioto River, where it might divide. But the thing that I want to keep in mind as we're designing map areas is that some of the ways that we would define a neighborhood, here's an obvious one that I've picked up as we've been talking. If I were to use the highway to divide a neighborhood, I'd be furthering what was an initial trauma by letting that highway serve as a dividing line between neighborhoods. And when we heard from Clintonville and we heard from the other neighborhoods in Linden that might find a good ally in their neighbors in Clintonville, they made it clear that that wouldn't be a reasonable boundary. And so what I know at this time is that I need to bring any preconceived notions of boundaries to the table so that us as a collective, diverse group of people can begin to share why what I presume to be a boundary today shouldn't be considered a boundary next week. So that's my thoughts as it relates to boundaries and physical barriers at this time.
Chair Moore, I agree with you. I was going to say that in the north part of Columbus, I'm thinking of I-270 being potentially a natural barrier or natural boundary, not a barrier, a boundary. In fact, we want to make sure it's not a barrier and not perceived that way, but that it could potentially serve as the edge of a district if it's necessary to move a population to make the districts equal or basically to align population boundaries. I-270 is one place to do it, but I'm very cognizant of what you're referring to. For example, what happened as well down in Franklinton with I-70 and dividing the neighborhood. So even if we started at major highways or, for example, Alum Creek up in my part of Columbus is another natural boundary we might naturally use. I could see that we might need to expand a little bit beyond that to try to reunite perhaps some neighborhoods that have been cut in the past by the use of these natural or man-made markers.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Chair Moore and Commissioner Paul. And to kind of echo those thoughts, but also what we heard before, really want to make sure and think about like how some neighborhoods were formed because of redlining, right? And that there's some things and we're going to have to look at both the history, the current population, and the culture as we're kind of coming up with these maps to the best that we can without like editorializing this process. And so that's very important. But I do want to reiterate, to sound like a broken record on purpose, please complete the survey. I believe you have until July 2nd to complete the survey. And you can tell us specifically what you feel are some boundaries or what should never be considered a boundary. And we need to hear that information. So if you go to www.columbus.gov columbus.gov/districting commission. You'll be able to complete the survey. You'll see the link there for the survey. And yeah, so please, and don't hold anything back. We need to hear unfiltered commentary as to what you think and how we can best do this process, so that we're making decisions that hopefully many people will be happy with. So do we have any other thoughts on that from the commission? Okay, hearing none, we will continue. I don't think there are any other questions in the queue, but double checking. All right, seeing none and seeing no raised hands, I believe that we will go into the closing part of this evening. Cool. So we do have a question. Okay, I see it just popped up there. So we do have a question here. What are some neighborhoods? This is a question for the panelists. What are some neighborhoods you think, if districted together, would create the best equitable representation for those communities? So you want, that's what I was, you're right. Yeah, so for the panelists who are still with us here on the call, the question is, what are some neighborhoods you think, if districted together, would create the best equitable representation for those communities? I believe we still have Reverend King and Mr. Alexander on. Either wanted to take a swing at that for their neighborhood.
Mr. King, we're unable to hear your audio. Are you able to hear Avery?
No, ma'am.
Okay, because I can see he's speaking, but unable to hear.
Can you hear me now?
Looks like he's unmuted. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
We've lost you again, sir. We heard you briefly.
Right, we may be having some technical difficulties with Reverend King. But if he comes on, we'll certainly hear his perspective on that question. Mr. Alexander, did you have any thoughts about your neighborhood in particular, or the neighborhood that you're familiar with, as far as which neighborhoods, if districted together, do you think would make an equitable representation for those communities? Nope, I don't hear anyone, but that is also quite a big question that we will be wrestling with over this next couple of months as we go through this process. I'm really looking at everything, the demo, the economy, and how can we, you know, to the best that we're able to within the very tight constraints that we are working with, how can we create these 9 districts in a fair way? We will be rolling around in that. So please, again, please complete the survey. Please let us hear your voice. Don't abstain on this one. We need to hear from everyone. So I just want to say thank you to our community members for your engagement in this discussion tonight. And thank you for bringing up those points for us to consider. And so we've completed the community discussion portion of this meeting, and we'll now continue into our working session. We invite viewers to stay on, but want to share the following information before we transition into the working session. Our next meeting will be 1 week from today, Wednesday, June 30th at 5:30 p.m., focused on our New Americans community. All are invited. We recognize that far too often these voices are unheard when decisions are being made. For that reason, we wanted to create a specific space for those opinions to be voiced. Look out for more information on how to join this meeting coming soon. And again, please take the survey. You can find the survey link and more information about this work, the districting work, on the CRDC website, www.columbus.gov/districting commission. And if you have any questions, please email crdc@columbus.gov. Thank you all again. And at this time, we will begin the working session. Commissioner Moore?
Thank you, Commissioner Frost. Thank you, guests, and all who participated this evening. Again, this is the time for those that have remained on the call. This is the working meeting session of this meeting. This is the time where commissioners coordinate our plans, our ideas, and our strategies so that we can effectively move this work forward. And today, although I don't have an agenda, I wanted us to go ahead and explore, if we would, some of the things we heard today. Most importantly, the piece I think we heard from Mrs. Hightower, and I shared a link with us all about that opportunity atlas she referenced. And I'm thinking that could be a piece that we review because I'm hearing an echoed sentiment of communities that feel that they've lost voice. And I want to thank you, Commissioner Paul, for controlling expectations by reminding people of the limited scope of our work. And I think it does us a great deal of merit if we continue to remind folks of the very refined the very tight limitations we have for our scope of work. But I do want us to be as keenly aware of the historic traumas, of the historic experiences, so that as we make borders and lines and propose maps, that these things aren't things that are foreign to us. There's also there's a great radio episode, a podcast that was shared on Point on NPR, did a piece on the impact of the development of Highway 70 and some of the ways that the federal government is going to work to reverse some of the negative impacts. And so, again, since so much of our work is controlled by federal guidelines and state guidelines, it might be to our advantage to review that as well. And I'll drop that into our shared document. I have no agenda items, but I did want to open up conversation for us as we continue to screen what I'm calling an echo of shared sentiment. And I didn't know what others were feeling, but at this time, if you want to share maybe what you're thinking or what you're feeling, please do. Commissioner Paul.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I just want to say, I think we as members of this commission do recognize that we're engaged in an historic process. But at the same time, that it is a process. Even when we produce these maps of districts, that's not going to bring about change in representation directly. It's one of the foundational changes on which change will be built. At least I think that's our expectation and hope. Through the candidates that will emerge from these districts, better opportunities for candidates in districts that perhaps have not been competitive, just to use the plain word for it, in the past. And hopefully better representation of those districts because of the interaction between those newly elected members. But those are things that will happen years in some cases after we've completed our work. So I just want to, as you say, kind of set some expectations, even though we believe what we're doing is important and will be ultimately historic, we're not going to be able, and Columbus residents are not going to be able to see instant change because of what we're doing. We're setting some bedrock for change, I think. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well said. Bedrock for change, right? Bedrock for eventual change. Any other comments, thoughts, feedback by any of the other commissioners? Commissioner Frost?
Yeah, so I keep thinking about just the weight of kind of what we're talking about. And so we know that we can't skew it for a demographic or a political mind of any sort. But we also know that because of redlining and the way that the neighborhoods have changed, we have whole areas of people that are specific demographics. And so that's a needle that we're going to have to thread, keeping the federal law in check and in mind with that. And then I think that just to kind of add some additional maybe clarification, when we're talking about that race-based lens, it isn't in a way to favor, but just to remember that race has always been a factor in the lens as decisions have been made over time. And so we can't just be colorblind or race blind in our discussions, but we have to kind of keep it in thought while we remain in line with the law. And so I just wanted to make sure that it came back to that, because I know that some folks might hear it and it goes a different way. And so I think that that's going to be important. And we can't deny that we know that there are certain, depending on what part of town you're in, there's a certain demographic that's more populated or represented in that area of town than another area of town. And that we just have to, like, why can't we just cut it like a pizza pie? But I know that that's not how it works. But we're going to have quite a challenge on our hands.
Thanks again for that insight, Commissioner Frost. Any other thoughts? Any feedback any of the other commissioners want to share at this time?
Just,
Commissioner Cabot, please. Yes, sir.
I thought it was curious to read this week about part of southeastern Oregon trying to transfer to Idaho, and the difficulties involved in that. My belief is that the area commissions and the civic associations that are intact and in place now have essentially been self-selected, that these are groups of people, residents who have bonded together with their community of interest. So as I go forward, I think the most important thing for me is going to be to preserve the integrity of the existing area commissions and civic associations. I don't think Oregon's going to get to transfer to Idaho, and I don't think we should be splitting area commissions either. Thank you.
Thank you for that insight. And to challenge us, and we may not know the answer, Commissioner Cabot, how many civic associations are there currently? 21, and we have to make 9 districts. So there will be a few Idahos taken away from Oregon. Thank you, sir.
And Chair, just to clarify, there are 21 area commissions. There are literally hundreds of civic associations, often within the same areas. So.
Yep. Yes. So many of the existing divisions that were self-selected, use Commissioner Cabot's term, aren't yet refined enough to give us 9 contiguous districts. The closest thing to that will possibly be election wards, and I don't know that number off of the top of my head. But sadly, there will be areas that will need to join with others, and that's where that insight and our diverse voices is really going to be lifted in that effort. I think we have a commissioner that's looking up the number of precincts, so I don't want to stop before we get that information. Anybody in this room know how many precincts we have, election precincts? About 7, we believe there could be. But even there, I think it's going to be both an art and a science. And so we're going to be challenged. But at the end of the day, we've heard from our communities. Today we heard a lot of things we've heard previously, but I think we heard it a little louder and a little more clearly. But each of the districts have shared with us some of their history. Yes, Commissioner Paul.
Chair Moore, I was intrigued by a comment earlier by Mr. Alexander, and he mentioned grocery stores and, in effect, food deserts in some areas of Columbus. I know they exist. We heard this, I think, at our last meeting as well, in a slightly different way, about the disparity between some neighborhoods and their opportunities for what many of us consider neighborhood-based shopping, for groceries, for clothing, for necessities, and others. And I guess I have a question for our staff here. Perhaps Ms. Walters will know or not, but whether the tools we'll be using will help us identify retail centers, whether we will be able to see on the maps as we're developing them where significant retail centers are located within neighborhoods or areas that don't have any. Because that might also be something that we should include in our consideration so that we're not, in effect, further distancing, if you will, a particular district from its shopping opportunities, its food resources, that kind of thing.
You know, I want to think out loud. And again, this is the ugly part of our meeting, the processing part. The thing that I recall as you share what you shared, Commissioner Thal, is the South Side, when we had the South Side speaking, and they were sharing about how many of them live in Columbus, but they either go grocery shopping or spend their money in adjacent suburban communities. And so I don't know if it's the mere presence of a retail outlet that would help in defining that area as much as it might tell us a story of a failed community, a community that has populations and numbers, but not the economic power. And I love it. We have to keep thinking and talking about things like this, right? And I love that in the back of my mind is the voices of those who spoke up during that Southside meeting. And I love that what you're reflecting on is what you heard today from people on the East Side and something they're needing and lacking. And collectively, as we share our notes and as we continue to reflect on what we've heard, we could maybe take something like our 20 precincts that exist in Columbus and turn that into 9 district maps, or our countless hundreds of civic associations and turn that into 9 districts. I don't know. Any other thoughts from any other commissioners right now?
Commissioner Paul, I had a slight answer to your question. I don't know that we'll be able to add that as a Esri layer. However, I know that Feeding America does have that data. And I actually did some research on food deserts and food security in Franklin County and in Columbus. So I can be sure to share that information with you. They have a map on Feeding America that can tell you, how many, because there's been a lot of different things that are going, especially in Franklin County and Cuyahoga County, where food insecurity has kind of been skyrocketing over time. So I'll be happy to share that with you all.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Commissioner Cerezuela?
I kind of want to maybe switch gears to the survey if anyone has any additional points, because, we are about a week out until the survey closes, I believe. And, just knowing how comprehensive the survey is, I think the last time, 2 weeks ago, we had 400 respondents, which is amazing. How do we want to kind of dissect and, kind of comprehend what people are telling us? Is there a way that we can kind of word cloud this survey based on people's responses? Just because that's a lot of data to dissect and go through. I'm just trying to think strategically.
So the survey there's going to be a report produced by the person that's helping, the entity that's helping us put the survey together and make sure it gets disseminated. So Murphy Epson, who has been working with us, they will produce a report that I plan to have to you all by the end of July. So you'll have a report of all that data. Currently, we have, I think, over 1,200 surveys filled. We had roughly 180 surveys filled out on Friday alone. So people are dialing in, people are getting engaged. I would like to see more surveys get filled out. So if you haven't filled this out and you're still watching, be sure to fill out our survey. But there will be a report of the survey data to kind of help you guys have a comprehensive overview of the responses that were received.
I'd like to add, again, I don't, district and commission is not during work time, but I did hear that there is going to be some promotions around CODA transit stops and transit lines for the survey, which I was really happy to hear. So thank you.
This is great. When we start thinking about what it means to have community engagement and community voice lifted up, to hear that there's 1,200 responses to the surveys, to have heard the many voices we've heard on these calls, I feel that we're getting close to being adequately equipped with enough information to move forward with the work of creating these maps. And so I don't need to prolong our time together. If there's no other need for anyone to lift up something for the good of the order, we can go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. So with nothing being said, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.